Okay, so before I show you this clip, just a little bit of a explainer. So this is one of the more popular game shows in America. Most of you probably have heard of it, called The Price is Right. And the way The Price is Right works is that at the beginning of each round, they have a contest where players are bidding on various products. In this particular scenario, what players are bidding on is an elliptical machine, so sort of a workout machine, kind of similar to a treadmill. And then basically what happens is that the players have to pick a price that they think the elliptical machine is worth, and the closest to that price without going over wins and is allowed to keep playing the game and playing other games later on. So again, the goal is to pick the price closest to the actual value of the item without going over.
Of you four who bids nearest to the actual retail price without going over. Sabrina, what do you bid?
$1,200.
Her bid is $1,200. Kyle's bid is
$1,000.
$2,000.
$1,000.
$1,000. And here is Brian.
$1,300, Bob.
$1,300 for Brian. What for Jose?
$9.99.
$9.99. And one of you is exactly right. And the bidder who has hit it right on the nose will win a $500 bonus. Now, Jose, the only way you could win is to be exactly right, because Kyle bid $1,000 and you bid $9.99. Now, I do not believe that in all of the history of The Price is Right that has happened. So, you realize that the odds are really against you then, Jose.
That's all right, Bob.
Right. After all, we have been on for 35 years.
35 years, yes.
And it
indeed.
has never happened. Often I have told contestants that is not a good bid.
Hey, it's there, Bob.
Because
It's
you
there.
have to be exactly right to win.
Oh, that's me, Bob.
And the actual retail, $9.99. Jose has bid $9.99 when someone had bid $1,000 and he won. He won a bonus of $5.
Okay, so what's interesting about this clip is a number of things. I'm just going to take us back so we can actually see what the bids are. Let me find a part where you see the bids. All right, so first thing to realize about this game is that it's not simultaneous, meaning that the players aren't giving their bids at the same time. And in fact, every player except for this player who picked first, in fact, gets to see that person's bid before they make their bid. So this person gets to see her bid, this person gets to see these first two player bids, and then this last player, of course, gets to see all three bids. So this gives this last player a really big benefit, because in a sense, instead of the game being played simultaneously, for him, it's sequential, meaning that he gets to see the choices of the other players. And this gives him information that the other players don't have. So again, the product is an elliptical machine, a workout machine. You could have no idea how much the elliptical machine is worth, but then as other people are making their bids, you start to get an idea maybe about how much the product is worth. And so the first person says 12, you'll notice the second person 1,000, the third. So you can see that the bids are all clustered around a similar amount of money. Now, what's interesting about this last person's strategy of picking $9.99 is that, in fact, it would be much better for him to pick something like $1. Right? Because remember, the point of the game is to get closest to the value of the product without going over. Now, of course, we already know that the value of the product is $9.99, so all three of these players have gone over. He doesn't know this, of course, but if he had picked $1 here, he would in fact still have won, because he would have been the only player who was below the actual price of the product. And so by picking $9.99, I mean, even though he ultimately was correct, you actually hear Bob Barker, the classic host of Price is Right, you actually hear him say that this actually isn't that good of a strategy because it would be better for him to pick something like $1. However, just by virtue of the fact that he saw the three prices being bid before him, this gives him information at least, and so he can position his bid against the other three people's bids, and he does so by picking $1 less than this individual. So I just think that's a very interesting clip, and again, another fantastic example of game theory, albeit this time what we would call a sequential game. So, in one of the first instances of game theory being used for real world and extremely important reasons is perhaps its use during the Cold War between the US and the USSR, the former Soviet Union. And of course, the Cold War is about you have two nuclear powers, both countries have nuclear bombs. And they're, in this Cold War, so they're not literally fighting with each other, but there's this threat, and there's sort of this understood threat that one of the other two countries could drop the bomb on the other. And of course, you had the whole communism, capitalism subplot that was going on at this time as well. But one of the earliest instances that came around in the late 1950s and early 1960s with the rapid development of game theory was its use in what we would go on to call mutually assured destruction. And what mutually assured destruction was basically the idea that if one country dropped a bomb on the other, that the other country would send bombs. And so it was like, if you bomb me, I'm going to bomb you back. And of course, famously, the two countries strategically situated bombs in places that were not known. So, for example, the U.S. put a bunch of their bomb launchers out in the middle of nowhere. Virtually impossible for the USSR to know actually where the bombs were, and of course the USSR did something similar. So you couldn't simply bomb the launch locations to avoid mutually assured destruction. So there was this understanding that if one country happened to bomb the other, then they were just going to send a bunch of bombs, and again you would have that mutually assured destruction. So we can play this game out in what we call a sequential game. So all of the games previously up to this point that we've discussed in Chapter 9 have been simultaneous games. That is, that the decisions of the players are made simultaneously and not with the information of what the other has chosen. A good example of this is rock, paper, scissors, right? When you play rock, paper, scissors, the whole point of that game is that you don't get to see what the other player picks before you make your decision. It would be an extremely boring game. In fact, if that were the case, you would be able to win that game every single time if you actually were able to see what the other player picked. But sequential games are super important as it pertains to business decisions and geopolitical decisions, and the mutually assured destruction game is a good example of this, albeit an extremely morbid topic. So if we model the game in this way, we have the USSR as being what we call the leader of the game. That is, that they choose first, the first mover of the game, and they have two choices. They can either choose to bomb the United States, or they can not bomb the United States. And then in each outcome of the game, there are these payoffs. You can just think about these as utility levels. That's the easiest way to think about it. So if the USSR doesn't send a bomb, then the game ends and both countries walk away unharmed, right? Basically with zero. However, if the U.S. chooses to respond, so if the USSR does bomb, then now the U.S. has a choice, and they either bomb or they don't bomb. If both countries bomb, that is, the USSR bombs first, and then the U.S. responds with bombing, both countries are destroyed, and they both have negative 100. If the USSR bombs and then the U.S. decides not to bomb, then the USSR gets 100, so effectively they've won, and the U.S. is destroyed. So they get negative 100. And I should mention that the first payoff goes to the USSR and the second payoff goes to the USA. I guess you can see that in terms of color coding. So what we want to do is we want to use a technique called backwards induction. So the way to solve sequential games is to use backwards induction and then work our way back towards the beginning of the game. So instead of starting with the USSR and asking do they want to bomb or not bomb, we in fact start with this decision by the USA, whether they want to bomb or not bomb, again assuming that the USSR has chosen to bomb. And we can see that the USA does much better. The USA. It doesn't matter what the USA picks. They've been bombed, so they get negative 100 in either scenario. The only difference between these two outcomes is that in this scenario, the USSR is also destroyed when the US chooses to bomb. And in this scenario, the USSR is not destroyed if the US chooses no bomb. And so again, this comes down to assumptions we make about, what we think is going to occur. And again, because the United States doesn't want to be destroyed relative to the USSR not being destroyed, we can sort of safely assume that if the USSR chooses to bomb, that the USA is also going to bomb. And so this is the outcome of that particular game. So we can actually define this as a Nash equilibrium of the game, because neither player sort of would want to move to another position. So in other words, bombing from the US, it can be seen as a best response to the USSR bombing. Okay? Now, the problem with this is that this is what we call a non-credible threat. The reason why it's a non-credible threat is because the USSR has perfect information here. They know that if they choose to bomb, that it's in the United States' best interest to also bomb. Because again, the USA doesn't want to leave themselves destroyed while the USSR is able to, essentially walk away unscathed. So the USSR knows that the USA is going to choose bomb should they choose bomb. So we can see that the USSR knows that if they bomb, they're going to end up at negative 100. And again, we know that because we first started by determining what the USA strategy was and then working backwards. So we go back to this point and we see that if the USSR does not bomb, they're much better than if they bomb. Because again, we know that if they bomb, then the USA is going to bomb and they're going to get negative 100. Whereas if the USSR instead chooses not to bomb, they walk away unscathed, not bombing each other, and both countries walk away with 0. And so by working backwards in the game, we can see that it in fact is the best interest of the USSR to choose no bomb. Even though there is this potential outcome here where the USSR chooses bomb and the USA chooses no bomb. But again, this is not a credible threat because we know that if the USA is bombed, they're also going to choose bomb as well. And so the USSR, seeing this, instead chooses in this first period to not bomb, and both countries, walk away having not bombed each other. And of course, this is how the Cold War actually ended up playing out. Neither country choosing to bomb the other one, and both walking away from it relatively unscathed. Now, of course, the USSR did collapse as a country before turning into its current manifestation as Russia. So one may argue perhaps that the USSR didn't walk away from the Cold War completely unscathed, but certainly both countries benefited from the fact that they didn't bomb each other. Another type of sequential game is called the market entry game. And so again, this is a situation where you have one firm making a decision and then one player making a decision and then another player responding to that. So again, this is a sequential game. In this game, a new firm decides whether to enter a market or not enter a market. If they don't enter the market, then they get 0 in profits because they didn't enter the market, and the monopolist is able to enjoy high profitability at $20. If the new firm enters the market, then the outcome of the game is then determined by what the monopolist does. The monopolist can accommodate the new firm, that is to say, they choose a pricing strategy that effectively enables the new entry to comfortably enter the market, or they can fight. And if they fight, they'll reduce the profits of the new firm and also reduce the profits themselves as well. And so, if we start at the end of the game, we can see that if the monopolist is choosing between accommodate and fight, they're going to choose to accommodate because their profits are higher than if they choose to fight. And so the new firm sees this and knows that if they enter the market, the monopolist is going to accommodate, and therefore they're going to earn profits of 15. And we can see that that's much better for the new firm than if they chose not to enter the market at all at zero. And so as a result, the new firm chooses to enter the market, and then the monopolist chooses to accommodate that firm. And we can see that this is the Nash equilibrium of the game because it's credible. We know, again, by starting at the final round, we know that the monopolist is going to choose accommodate over fight because $5 is greater than $4 in profits. The new firm sees that the monopolist is going to choose to accommodate, or is going to choose to accommodate. And since this outcome of $15 is much better than this outcome of $0, we can safely assume that the new firm is going to choose entry. That is, they're going to enter the market. So again, in sequential games, you start in the final round and then you work your way back. So we see that, again, in this final round, this tells us the monopolist is going to accommodate. And since the monopolist is going to accommodate, we know this is the outcome of the game if the new firm chooses to enter the market. And since this outcome of the game is better than this outcome of the game, then the new firm is going to choose enter and the monopolist is going to accommodate. All right, and then finally, this is one of my favorite games, types of sequential games, and it's called the Caterpillar game. And the way this game works is we have two players, Kier and Mark, and they each take turns, okay? And in each round, the players are choosing to pick up and continue the game, or they choose down and they end the game. If they ever choose down, then they get the payoffs as listed here at the bottom of this line. So, for example, if Kier chooses to end the game at the first round, he's going to get $1 and Mark's going to get 0. If Kier chooses to continue the game by choosing up, and then Mark chooses down to end the game in the second time period, then we can see that Mark is going to end up with $2 and Kier is going to end up with $0. And again, we can sort of go through the entire game and we can work backwards to see what we think, how the game's going to end up. And what's interesting about this is that you get a fairly counterintuitive outcome. When most students look at this game, they see that there are these two end positions that Mark is choosing in this final round. He chooses up, and both players get $3, or Mark chooses down. Kier gets $2 while Mark gets $4. And so if we start here, we can see that fairly clearly, if given the option between choosing up and getting $3 and choosing down and getting $4, we know that Mark is going to choose down and end the game in this direction. So we know that if the game gets to this point here, that Mark is going to choose down and he's going to get $4 while Kier gets $2. And again, remember, we're going to assume that everything is perfect information. So Kier sees all these numbers. He knows that if the game gets to this point, that Mark is going to choose down. Kier looks ahead and says, wait a minute, if I let Mark make this decision, he's going to choose down and get $4. I'm only going to get $2. If I instead ended the game in this third round, I would get $3, which is better than $2. All right, and we can see that Mark only gets $1 as opposed to the $4 if the game had continued. Now, of course, Mark looks ahead at round 2 and has a very similar situation. He knows that Kier is going to end the game in the third round because Kier assumes that Mark is going to end the game here in the fourth round. And he will only get 2, so instead Kier chooses down in the third round and walks away with 3. Well, Mark sees that if he ends the game in the second round, he gets $2 as opposed to the $1 he gets if Kier ends the game in the third round. So Mark, looking ahead, knowing that Kier is going to choose down here, and the fact that he's only going to get $1, Mark instead chooses to end the game in the second round so that he ensures he gets $2 as opposed to the $1 he gets when the Kier ends the game in the third round. But then if we go all the way back to the beginning of the game, Kier sees that if Mark chooses down in the second round, which we've already established is what Mark's going to do, because again, Mark wants to avoid getting $1 here. Kier wants to avoid getting $2 here, so Kier ends the game here. But then Mark wants to avoid $1, so Mark is going to, in fact, end the game here. Kier, if Mark ends the game here, only gets $0, which is worse than if he chose to end the game in the first round and walk away with $1. So by using backwards induction, we actually find that the Nash equilibrium of this game is for Kier to choose down in the first round and walk away with exactly $1, and Mark walking away with nothing. Now, when students first see this, they're confused. They're saying, but wait a minute, can't Kier see that he'll do better if he lets the game go on and they both can earn $3? Why not? Well, again, strict rationality says that Mark's never going to choose up here at this point in the game. Instead, what he's going to choose is choose down. And because Kier sees that he does worse by letting the game progress to the fourth round than instead of just ending the game in the third round, Kier's going to end the game in the third round if he ever gets to that point. Again, Mark sees this and says, well, wait a minute. Why am I going to let Kier end the game in the third round and only get $1 when I can end the game in the second round and walk away with 2? So on and so forth, all the way back until the very first period of the game, and we can see that the Nash equilibrium says that Kier is going to pick down, walk away with $1, and Mark is going to walk away with no money. And so again, this goes back to that Nash equilibrium that was really so influential, which was that rational self-interest sometimes leads to adverse circumstances. If Kier and Mark instead work together, then they may be able to get to these later rounds and earn more money for both of them. But again, if we assume strict self-interested rationality, then what we're left with is a belief that Kier should in fact end the game in the first round, take his $1, and go buy a soda or something. So the point of sequential games is to show that when we make decisions, we are making those decisions based upon updated information. In other words, when we go to the second, third, and fourth rounds, so when Mark is making his decision in the fourth round, he is choosing what's best for him, which is to end the game in that fourth round and walk away with $4. Kier looks ahead, sees that Mark has this incentive to end the game in the fourth round and walk away with $4, and instead chooses to end the game in the third round so that he can walk away with $3 as opposed to the $2 he's going to end up with. And again, we just sort of go back. And so what this shows us is that when the game is sequential, if we start in the last period and we work our way back, we're able to determine the likely outcome of the game, the Nash equilibrium of the game, by simply using rational self-interest to guide our analysis. And the same was true in the market entry game. And the same is true in the mutually assured destruction game. So for the same reason why the U.S. and the USSR never bombed each other during the Cold War is because backwards induction says that not bombing is in fact the best possible outcome for the two countries, given the fact that the USSR knows that the U.S. is going to respond by bombing. So it isn't the case that the USSR doesn't do better by bombing in all aspects of the game, right? Clearly, if the USSR bombs and the US doesn't bomb, this is the best scenario for the USSR. They walk away with 100 and the USA is completely decimated. But the USSR sees, by backwards induction, sees that the USA is going to bomb, and as a result, this incentivizes the USSR to not bomb. And the same thing here with the market entry game. The new firm realizes that it's in fact better for them to enter the market regardless of what the monopolist chooses. And that's another thing here, is that sometimes the decision is pretty straightforward. The new firm enters the market, and the worst they can do is earn $4 in profits. Whereas if they don't enter the market, they're going to earn 0 in profits. So, excuse me, we can see that it really doesn't even matter in this scenario what the monopolist does. The new firm is going to enter the market regardless. And then in the Caterpillar game, the point here is to really show the power of backwards induction. So if we go to the end of the game and we look at how the game would end if it progressed to this point, we in fact see that rational self-interest causes Kier to end the game in the first round, as opposed to letting the game continue and they're both able to earn additional money.